Once upon a time, at the edge of a deep, dark forest, there lived a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy's name was Hansel, and the girl's name was Gretel. They lived in a tiny wooden house with a slanted roof, a stone chimney, and creaky floorboards that groaned when you stepped too hard. The woodcutter worked hard every day, chopping trees and gathering firewood. But no matter how much he worked, there was never enough money. The family often had only dry bread to eat, and sometimes not even that. Hansel and Gretel were always cheerful, even when their stomachs rumbled. They made up songs, played with pine cones, and helped each other smile. But their stepmother was not so kind. One cold evening, as the wind howled outside and the cupboard stood bare, the stepmother whispered harshly to the woodcutter by the fire. "There is no more food," she said. "We cannot feed them. We must take the children into the forest and leave them there." The woodcutter's eyes widened with sorrow. "No," he whispered. "They are my children. I could never do that." But the stepmother's voice grew sharp. "If we don't, we will all starve. You want us all to die together?" The woodcutter didn't answer. He stared into the flickering flames, torn between his love for his children and the empty growl of hunger. What they didn't know was that Hansel and Gretel were still awake, curled together in bed under a thin, patchy blanket, and they had heard every word. Gretel clung to Hansel. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Hansel hugged her tightly. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I have a plan." Early the next morning, the stepmother called. "Wake up, children. We're going into the woods to collect firewood. Hurry now." Hansel got out of bed and quietly put on his coat. Before leaving the house, he crept outside to the small stone path and filled his pockets with smooth white pebbles. He didn't tell Gretel. He just gave her a small smile. The forest was cold that morning, and the trees looked like tall shadows stretching into the sky. The stepmother walked fast, her coat swishing behind her. The woodcutter walked slowly, head bowed. Hansel followed, dropping one white pebble at a time along the path. Every few steps he would pause, pretending to tie his shoe or scratch his leg. Drop, drop, a pebble here, a pebble there. Gretel didn't ask why. She trusted her brother. After a long walk, they reached a clearing deep in the forest. The stepmother turned to them. "Rest here by the fire," she said coldly. "We'll be right back." Then she turned and disappeared between the trees with the woodcutter, who looked back once with sad, watery eyes. Hansel and Gretel sat beside the fire. It crackled and popped, warm and comforting. But soon, the fire burned low, and then it died. The forest grew quiet, so quiet that they could hear the wind whispering through the trees like an old secret. The birds had stopped singing. The shadows stretched longer. Gretel began to cry. "They're not coming back," she said. Hansel wrapped his arms around her. "Don't be afraid. I dropped white stones along the path. We can follow them home." So when the moon rose high, glowing like silver in the sky, the stones sparkled in the moonlight, one by one, leading the way. They walked hand in hand through the quiet forest, following the tiny trail of light. Hours passed, and the wind grew cold. But finally they saw it, the crooked roof of their tiny wooden home. They crept inside and slipped into bed without a hard sound. The stepmother didn't notice, but the woodcutter, who had sat by the fire all night with tears in his eyes, saw them. And in his heart, he whispered, "Thank you." Days passed, and things grew even worse in the little house at the edge of the woods. There was no more bread, no more flour, and the firewood was running low. The children could hear their stepmother whispering again at night, her voice like a cold wind through the cracks in the wall. "We must take them back into the forest," she hissed. "Farther this time, where they won't find their way home." The woodcutter said nothing. His shoulders were heavy and his eyes were tired. Deep in his heart, he hoped the children would somehow find safety. He could not stop what was coming. Hansel and Gretel heard everything again. "They'll try to leave us again," whispered Gretel. Hansel nodded. "I'll gather more pebbles." But when Hansel slipped outside the next morning, the stepmother had locked the door. "No wandering," she snapped. "We're leaving now." Hansel's pockets were empty. As they walked through the woods, Hansel looked around, searching for anything he could use. Then, reaching into his pocket, he found a small piece of stale bread. Quietly, he broke it into tiny crumbs and began dropping them along the path, one by one, step by step, crumb by crumb. The forest was thicker this time. The trees were taller, the shadows darker. No birds sang, no sunlight peeked through the branches. After hours of walking, they came to a place where even the wind felt afraid. "Rest here," said the stepmother. "We'll return soon." And once again she and the woodcutter disappeared into the trees. The children sat together. The fire burned low. The hours passed, and then the fire died. Hansel stood up and looked around. The forest was darker than before, and no moon shone that night. He searched the ground, but the crumbs were gone. "The birds," he whispered. "They've eaten the crumbs." Gretel's eyes filled with tears. Hansel took her hand. "Don't cry. We'll keep walking. We'll find a way." So they walked, and walked, and walked. They were tired. Their feet were sore. Their stomachs empty. Days passed. They ate berries and drank from puddles. They curled up beneath trees at night, shivering under the stars. And just when they thought they could walk no more, they saw it. A house. But not just any house. This house was made of sweet things. The walls were made of gingerbread. The windows were sugar. The roof was covered in frosting. Candy canes lined the path, and chocolate buttons were pressed into the walls. It looked like a dream. The children blinked. Was it real? Gretel took a step forward. She touched the door. It felt soft and sweet. She licked her finger. "Sugar!" she gasped. Hansel ran to the wall and broke off a piece of gingerbread. "It's real!" He laughed. They ate and laughed between bites. For the first time in days, their stomachs were full, their hearts light. Then the door creaked open, slowly. Crack! An old woman stood in the doorway. She wore a shawl and had tiny round glasses balanced on her nose. Her back was bent, and her smile was wide. "Well, well," she said sweetly. "What do we have here? 2 hungry little mice nibbling at my house?" The children stepped back, afraid. "Oh, no, don't be scared," she said. "Come in, my dears. There's more food inside. Warm soup, fresh bread. You must be so tired." Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. Her voice was soft, her eyes kind, and they were so hungry, so they followed her inside. The cottage smelled of cinnamon and roasted nuts. There were cookies on the table, a pot of soup on the stove, a feather bed in the corner. The children ate and drank, and soon they fell into the soft bed and drifted into a deep, sweet sleep. But the old woman stood in the corner, watching with a crooked smile. Her eyes, once warm, now glinted cold like glass marbles. She whispered to herself, "Sleep well, little ones. Tomorrow, the feast begins." The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the sugar glass windows of the candy house. Gretel opened her eyes and stretched. For a moment, everything felt like a dream. A warm bed, a full belly, a soft room that smelled like cookies and cinnamon. But then she remembered the old woman. She looked around. The woman was gone. "Hansel?" she whispered. But Hansel was no longer beside her. Panic rose in her chest. She jumped from the bed and ran through the cottage. Hansel! She found him. Outside, locked inside a wooden cage behind the house. He looked scared. His hands gripped the bars. "She tricked us!" he cried. "Gretel, it was a trap. She's a witch." Just then the old woman appeared. But she didn't look kind anymore. Her smile was cruel. Her eyes were sharp like knives. Her bent back straightened just a little, and her voice lost all sweetness. "Ha!" she cackled. "Thought you'd feast on my house and walk away? No, no, my darlings. I will feast, but not on cookies." She pointed a crooked finger at Hansel. "You, boy, will grow fat. I will feed you every day until you are plump and juicy. Then I will cook you." Gretel gasped and tried to run to the cage, but the witch blocked her. "And you, little girl," she hissed, "will help me. You'll cook, you'll clean, and you'll stay quiet." Gretel stood frozen. The witch grabbed her arm. "Now get to work. No tears, no tricks." Days passed. Every morning the witch gave Hansel food, cakes, sausages, bread with butter. Every morning she would say, "Stick out your finger, boy. Let me feel how fat you are." But Hansel was clever. He had found a tiny chicken bone in the corner of the cage, and every day he held it out instead. The witch, nearly blind, would feel the thin bone and frown. "Still skinny," she grumbled. "How can this be?" Inside, Hansel smiled, but outside he said nothing. Meanwhile, Gretel waited. She scrubbed, swept, and chopped wood, but inside she was watching, thinking, planning. One morning the witch had had enough. "I'm tired of waiting," she growled. "He's fat enough. Today we bake." She shoved Gretel toward the oven. "Heat it up. Make it hot, very hot." Gretel opened the heavy iron door. The heat inside was strong and dry like fire from a dragon's breath. "Is it hot enough yet?" the witch asked. Gretel had an idea. "I'm not sure," she said sweetly. "I've never used an oven like this. Can you check for me?" The witch narrowed her eyes. "You silly girl," she muttered. "I'll do it myself." She bent down, peering inside. Closer, closer, and in one swift move, Gretel pushed her in. Slam! She shut the door and locked it tight. The witch screamed, the oven roared, then, silence. Gretel stood shaking. Her hands were cold, her knees weak. Then she ran to the cage. "Hansel!" she cried. "It's over, she's gone." She pulled the key from the witch's belt and opened the door. Hansel jumped out and hugged his sister tight. "You did it," he whispered. "You saved us." They didn't waste a moment. They ran into the cottage and began searching. In a locked chest beneath the floor, they found gold coins, shiny jewels, and sparkling stones. "Look at this," Gretel said. "We'll never go hungry again." They filled their pockets, then stepped outside. The forest looked different now, lighter, softer. The trees no longer loomed and the birds sang again. But they didn't know the way home, so they walked and walked, until one day they saw something familiar. A crooked roof, a stone chimney, their home. The woodcutter was outside, sitting, on the step with tears in his eyes. "Papa!" the children shouted. He looked up, and his face lit up like sunshine. "My children," he cried, running to hug them. "You're alive." They told him everything, and when he heard of the witch and the gold, he wept again, not from sadness, but from joy. As for the stepmother, she was gone. Some say she left when she thought the children were lost forever. Others say she disappeared into the forest and was never seen again. But none of that mattered now, because Hansel, Gretel, and their father were together. They rebuilt their home, filled it with laughter, and with the treasure from the witch's cottage. They never went hungry again. And every night before bed, Gretel would look out the window at the stars and whisper, even in the darkest forest, "There's always a way home." And Hansel would nod, holding her hand, knowing that, no matter what happened, they would always find their way, together.